18 illegal guns, a bucket load of ammunition, and a meager 5-year sentence. Those are not my words. Yesterday's Gina blazed the headline, ridiculous sentence. So we've asked our friend, attorney at law, Peter Champagne, to weigh in on the country's judicial system, or we might get a little bit more specific than that. Morning, my friend.
Good morning.
All the very, very
Good morning
best.
to your viewers as well.
You also wrote a column this morning. I don't think this would be your headline because I know editors do that, but it says Vox Pop verdict is off based injustice. First, bring me up to date what we're talking about. You defended a gentleman who was the driver of a van who had guns and ammunition in it, and he was given a 5-year sentence and maybe a 10 years because he was in jail for 5 years. And I suspect not only the average Joe, for want of a better phrase, but some of your colleagues are also saying that's no good.
Well, first of all, I wanted to say that in terms of that particular case, it was my associate, Mr. Kemar Robinson, who had instructed to have conduct of the case. In relation to what you just said a while ago about some of my colleagues taking objections to the outcome of the case, I would simply say that with the greatest of respect, their position is born out of ignorance. The fact of the matter is that in this particular case, the person that was convicted, Mr. Smith, had spent 5 years, almost 5 years already in custody. There was a social inquiry report that had been ordered in relation to him. It was excellent. The community report was excellent. He had no previous convictions. In terms of the actual facts of the case, his culpability was very limited. And also, what is important to note is that there was a co-accused at one point along the case who pleaded guilty,
and
who
accepted
took full responsibility for the ammunition and the firearm.
Yeah.
In addition to that, since the commencement of his case, there have been a number of developments in the law in terms of sentencing principles. There is this Court of Appeal decision, Misha Clement, that came out in 2016, I believe, that spoke about the fact that judges in sentencing can't just pick a figure and just put it out there. They have to apply the classical sentencing principles and so on. So in my view, having regard to all the circumstances, the judge quite rightly arrived at a particular decision.
Yeah. And you made that point in your article.
Yes.
You said, and I quote, and I hope they got this right, this notwithstanding, for anyone to jump to the conclusion that the sentence meted out to Kirk Smith and others is ridiculous, is downright irresponsible and unfair.
Yes.
Especially where those who are asserting the ridiculous nature of the sentences are strangers to the facts.
Yes.
You just stated the facts.
Yes.
Explain a little more to me about the second part that you said, that things have happened sentencing since then, and how does it apply to this particular case? I'm
glad you asked that question. Last year, you had, by way of a practice direction from the Chief Justice, sentencing guideline principles. That's one. Two, I referred to a recent Court of Appeal case that came about last year or latter part of 2016. And in all of those circumstances, the judge now would have to take into account those guidance in terms of principles and so on. At the material time when the co-accused pleaded guilty and took full responsibility, those were not yet enunciated in terms of the law. So that is what I refer to as new principles and new factors that any sentencing judge would have to take into account.
Let me ask you, Peter, the co-accused who took full responsibility, how many years did they get? For those who haven't been following the case, you understand? Let's look at that. How many years did they get?
He got 18 years.
18 years.
And in effect, he would not be serving 18 years.
Okay.
You only serve 2/3 of what you get, because in terms of when you go to prison, they count night and day differently as we know it. So anything that is said in terms of sentencing, in terms of numbers, it will be 2/3 of that, provided that they are on good behavior while they are there. It is something that is of universal application in other jurisdictions as well.
But people, I think the general...
may not be aware of that.
May not be aware of that. You say 18 years, you think somebody's going away for 18, but a lot of times we see them come out earlier, and we're not sure why.
Yes, they'll be eligible for parole after a certain period below that.
Okay, and your Smith,
yes.
Smith How many years did he get? 5?
He was sentenced to 5, but bearing in mind that he had been in custody awaiting trial for almost 5 years.
So
in effect,
in custody for 5 years
in
already?
custody, no bail, in custody. So the judge had to take that into consideration as well.
Right.
So the total, when you look at it, is really 10.
He was denied bail? Or is it
Yes,
that?
based on the allegations and based on the serious nature of the case, quantity of ammunition and firearm. But if I may, I just wanted to raise quickly another point.
Yes.
And it concerns the media. I think the time has come where cases of this nature, the media ought to be allowed inside the court, especially where the witnesses are not vulnerable witnesses, where it's not a sexual offense matter, where the witness is not an informant. In those circumstances, the media ought to be allowed.
Why is the media not allowed?
Yeah, why is it closed?
It is something that dates back to times that I can't even recall, and we have just come to know it as it is, and I think it's really for security reasons. But I don't see any reason why in this particular case, where the witnesses are police officers, they are not undercover agents or anything like that, the media ought to be allowed.
Yeah. Well, that's an important
because if they were there,
right,
then you would have observed the case from start to finish. You would have been able to reason it out and inform the public as to how it is that this judge rightly came to his conclusion.
Peter, I want to change lanes just a bit.
Yes.
And there's another headline on the front page that says, guns no problem. And this is judges in Western Jamaica blasted for light sentences in illegal firearm cases.
Yes.
I don't know if you're okay with that.
Yes, I read the headlines.
What about that one? Are the judges correct in that one also? Because it says here that some people were just given suspended sentences for fine with guns.
If it is that a judge could come here and sit, they would tell you one of the most difficult tasks that they have is when it comes to sentencing. And the reason for that is nothing personal. It's nothing personal in the sense of knowing the offender or anything like that. Let us get that clear. The fact of the matter is that they have to take into account a number of factors. The antecedent report of the accused, whether the accused is likely to reoffend, and they request independent investigation by way of social inquiry reports. And in all the circumstances, they have to take those factors into account and then arrive at a particular decision. It's never easy, and sentences will vary from time to time, and you have to bear in mind the circumstances. Someone may foist a firearm upon you. You have no choice in some of these communities but to take it to wherever they tell you to go, and on the way you may be stopped by the police.
When you listen to cases, I guess here also, but certainly abroad, you hear if I'm convicted, it's 15 years, minimum 15 years, minimum. Are they those guidelines here that if I shoot them prisoner, show that it's at least 20 years?
There are guidelines to the extent that the judge is obliged to consider aggravating factors in the instance where somebody is wounded and so on. But I wanted to make one quick and very important point. If it is that the powers that be are offended by these types of sentences, especially where there are fines of more than one firearms, then perhaps they may need to look at the legislation and say, listen, we're going to now amend the act to include a section in relation to dealing in firearms or trading in firearms, and a mandatory minimum is imposed in those circumstances. But in the absence of that, no judge can seek to impose that kind of sentence where the legislation is not there for it.
One more question. From your observation, working as a lawyer, how do we tackle crime? What do you see as one of the driving factors that's, bringing the crime rate, spiraling the crime rate that we're seeing in 2018 already? From your observation, what can we do? What do you think is the main root cause, and what can we do?
My understanding is that this program is for about 15 or 20 minutes.
No, well,
it would take 2 days to tell you. But in a very simple response, the problem of crime has never been a serious matter in terms of successive governments. And it requires financing, and it requires equipping the police with greater resources and equipping the justice system with greater resources as well. That is the #1 solution.
My final question, back to why you were here in the first place. What about the folks who say, no man, Mr. Champagne, is him defending the man, so he has to have.
I'm obliged to say what I'm saying now.
What do you say to those?
Very good point, and I would respond this way, and I think I made note of it in the article. The fact of the matter is that the time has also come when we may need to consider a public relations officer in terms of the judiciary. We need that role. We need someone designated
who could explain.
Can explain, because as it is, the hallowed principle and convention is that judges are not permitted to defend themselves from unwarranted attacks.
So if I say if the judge is foolish, he can't come out and say, well, this is why I did it.
Can't come out. And it's unfair to them. It's really unfair. So it's not a matter of the fact that I had been a participant in this particular case by representing someone. That's not the issue. I think the record speaks for itself, and in the past, I have indicated as much that, you know, when these things happen, there needs to be an independent voice.
Thanks for coming.
You're welcome.
And all the very best. Attorney at Law, Peter Champagne.
Wow, thank you. Next program to continue.